Shalom Aleichem. Very excited to examine na bissel the sugya Melech Basodeh. It's not enjoyable when you go to a kinnis and the person who's giving the session gets up and the first thing he says is, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why they asked me. I shouldn't do this. We should ask somebody else. No one appreciates that. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I want to make it clear that I'm just another Chaver HaKelel, really enjoying the sugyas, gaining a tremendous amount from the shiurim about Rav Farkash and Rav Klein and the guest mashpiyim. And I'm here anywhere in that context. I'm not here for la'imkoi. I'm here because I had this chus to charangeton in the sugya a little bit for a bunch of years. Really enjoy it, have a special geschmack in the sugya. So my chaver asked me to come up and to share a little bit of what I've learned in the sugya. But I want to make a very clear disclaimer and also frame this discussion today that I'm not here to really shed deep insights, which will give a much deeper avanda like we had in the other shiurim, which I really enjoyed. Just share a little bit about what I picked up, because when you immerse yourself in a certain sugya and you spend a lot of time in it, and you you pick up interesting things that maybe others don't notice. Another thing I want to mention is that even though we've been doing the sugya for many months, we've been spending a lot of time focusing on the havana of the mashal and the beard of the tshuva and how sus de la'ela, sus de latata, and the koyach, and how that whole sugya is understood. So sometimes when we're so arangeton in the emek of the sugya, we sometimes don't pay attention to other details that may seem more smaller. So I want to highlight some of those ideas. So I'm going to share the screen, and since most people listen to the recording, I encourage those listening to the recording to find this PDF, because it will be much more understood if you follow along with the visuals. How do you do this? View. Slideshow. Okay. So I want to begin with something very interesting, that when you learn the sugya and you spend a lot of time in Melech Basodeh, you come to an interesting realization that when the Rebbe talks about Melech Basodeh, the Rebbe is talking about as a davar chai. It's not something which is theoretical, something which is teoria. It's mamish a davar chai, where the Rebbe is mamchish the whole idea of Melech Basodeh in a way as a lebedik azach. So I want to begin. I came across with this ksav yad, which is only one word, but to me it says so much about the Rebbe's cook on Melech Basodeh. And this is a letter the Rebbe sent to people who were participating in a fundraiser for Lubavitch of Michigan. And interestingly, the same exact letter is found, which the Rebbe sent to a fundraiser for Yeshiva in England. And in that letter, the Rebbe talks about Melech Basodeh, and the Rebbe is highlighting what is the uftu of Lubavitch of Michigan, what is the Chabad House achieving. It's dedicated to helping fellow Jews become more fully and intimately aware of the king in the field concept. So the Rebbe is saying that the whole nukuda of a yeshiva or Lubavitch HaMosid is to help people understand and feel Melech Basodeh. But the Rebbe added in the Ksav Yad the word even. So dedicated to helping fellow Jews become even more fully and intimately aware. So to me, what the Rebbe is saying over here is that the fact that every Jew, that every Yid is fully and intimately aware of Melech Basodeh as a davar chi pashut. You don't need a Mosid Chinuch for that. You don't need a Meis Chabad for that. Every Yid feels that automatically. The Chiddush of the Mosid, the Chiddush of this Mosid that the Rebbe is addressing here, is that they make it even more fully and intimately aware. So this letter, this one word from the Rebbe highlights this idea that I want to bring out in the very beginning, and that is that Melech Basodeh is a davar chai, a davar amiti, something that every Yid naturally is able to access and feel in Chedesh Shalom. So this leads me to the next very interesting nekuda, and that is that we find an interesting ha'ara in Likutei Sichos, where the Rebbe says that the lashon in the Maimer is ve'elu zman is galus yud gimel is harachmim. Why does it say zman is galus? Well, Cheder could have said elul is galus is harachmim. What's the lashon zman? So the Rebbe brings out that this nekuda of Melech Basodeh is not something which is a davar noisef of Chedesh Shalom. And to quote the lashon in the Sikha, nor the Eibishter hat Melech eingestellt in Teva von Welt, as these manim seinem esat atzam and eis ratzin. So here we see in this Sikha an interesting concept where the Rebbe is telling us that this idea of Melech Basodeh is not something which is a davar noisef, one of the many different aspects of chunas of this time, but rather it's eingestellt in Teva. It's mamish a davar TV, just like it's natural to breathe the air outside. On the same sense, it's natural in Chedesh Elul to feel Melech Basodeh and to feel Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to bring different quotes from the Kedus, which I put together, where we see summary of these ideas. But as you can see here in this particular slide, highlighting the idea that Rebbe is saying that it's not something which is a davar neisiv, it's mamish a chelik from teva. And I think one of the shiurim, I think Rabbi Klein mentioned the story of Ablevik, that someone asked him under Shoshana by Nacht, where is exactly Binyan HaMalchus? And he explained, Ablevik said, don't you see, look at the river rushing by, don't you see the difference? So in other words, we're able to access a different level, a different reality. Similar to when the Alter Rebbe was in jail, and he was able to tell the time based on the mazalas, based on what's going on, Beruchnius. So the more I spent time in the Sugya Melech Basodeh, I came to realize more and more how the Rebbe wants us to look at this whole thing as a davar chai, something which is not theory, but something which is real. One of the most amazing places that we see this is by children's rallies. It's very, very geschmack to listen and to watch and to read the siches in Elul when the Rebbe spoke to children. But the Rebbe is mamchish, Melech Basodeh, in such a muchshusdike way, as the Kendig State Leben did, and a frekt bei dir, welche candy willst du? Like mamish, like a davar chai, something which is muchashi, something which you could actually feel. And this also is the reason why, in almost every time the Rebbe brings the Mashal Melech Basodeh, the Rebbe brings the Hisafa from the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Yecholim, and I bring over here different places where the Rebbe explains exactly what's the Hisafa of Yecholim and Rishoyim. But the simple taich is that Rebbe is trying to tell us that when we talk about Melech Basodeh, it's not something which is theoretical, it's something which Yecholim, every Yid can taka actually do this. The Peil Mamish, it's accessible to every single Yid. That's the first tikkun I wanted to bring out, though. It's Mamish, something which is eingestellt in the Teva from Chedesh Elul. As we move on, a sugya that has been spoken about a few times is what's the mucker of this mashal? Where does it come from? And people reference the mashal of the Baal Shem Tov, which really is about the 3 weeks. There's a Meredik Avart where the Rebbe said that this mashal, leimatzasi le'es ata makerdei, I still didn't find the mucker. And the Rebbe says, however, moving on Pashat, that the fact itself that the Alter Rebbe brought this mashal, Das Alein is the Gesta Makar. And even more than that, because the Alter Rebbe is a Paisik, so not only he becomes a Makar of this mashal, but through this psak of the Alter Rebbe, Melech Basodeh, he's poil as the inyan for Melech Basodeh is Nifal Hadavar B'chol Ha'elam Kulam. So there's a Meredik Avert over here. That not only, it's not like we don't have a Makar, Adar Rebbe. We have the best Makar. We have the Makar of the Alter Rebbe, who not only is a Makar, but the Alter Rebbe actually tut uf the minyan. He's poil this inyan als a davar chai in the metzias of the world through this psak din. One time in a rally, the Rebbe said something incredible, where being that the Alter Rebbe is the makar and the Alter Rebbe is a pesach, he's poiled that in the Welt. But in this rally, Tashma Mem Zayin, the Rebbe added, since the Alter Rebbe is a nasi b'Yisrael, not only is a pesach but he's a nasi, and the whole idea of a nasi is to be made a derech b'chaya yem yem, which means that everything that a nasi says has to be practical, has to be relevant to every single yid. Therefore, this Mashal Melech Basodeh is not only a psak din was ufgetan in Welt, be'efen ruchani, but it's a psak din and it's ufgetan in a way that every single yid, even the Pasha Shutim, every single yid has relevance to every single prat in the Mashal in a real way. And even more than that, the Rebbe continues and says, especially even the children, because children are able to understand the Mashal. And then the Rebbe added, as you can see in the Order 3, that not only is it even the children, but especially the children, because children are the one who are playing in the fields. So we see over here that the Rebbe is telling us that not only is the Alter Rebbe the mashal, is the makar, but the fact that the Alter Rebbe is the makar is in itself the greatest gift, because Alza Pesach, he creates this reality, and Alza Nasi, he brings this reality to every single one of us. Now, once we establish, as we just spoke now, Barichas, that this is a Dabar Chai, and this is an Eingestalten Teva, and this Melech Basodeh is not something theoretical, but it's something which is Ufgetan in Allah Elumis, and it's something which is Neget to every single Yid, even children. The obvious question is asked, we don't see the Melech. How is that going to help us? So here we have a very interesting sikha. The Rebbe asked this question, actually 2 different times. And the Rebbe asks, because in the mashal, of course, you're excited when you see the king. But in the nimshal, we don't see the king. And the Rebbe's answer, Bepashtis, is clearly, the Rebbe says that since this mashal is a part of Teres Emes, is Zicher Emes Lamitase, there's no question that's a Emes Azach, and it's not something which is an Inyan Geret. So the fact that this mashal is brought in Torah, and it's a psagdin from the Alter Rebbe, who's a Pesach and Nigla, and a Nistar, das allein means Emes Azach. I wouldn't see it begashmius. This doesn't take away from it. So nish gereya klal uklal. The Inyan is still there b'shleimusei ubamitasei, even if we can't see it. And then another time they Rebbe added even more than that. That the fact that you can't see the Melech, this itself is madgish even more geidel afla, because a yid could be misbeinen. At this I don't see the Melech is a raya, that the Melech is so great that I can't even see him. And still, this great Melech, who I can't even see begashmius, is still coming down to me to be with me in my personal sadeh. So, it's an answer that doesn't really satisfy the Nefesh B'Hamis 100%, because the fact is we still don't see. But the Rebbe is giving us some oisius to recognize two very strong points. Number one, the emes bleibt the emes, and the Teidas emes is the emes gefi shehu. And number two, we can even capitalize and utilize the fact that we don't see it as a way to get an even deeper appreciation for this reality. This Nakuda, I just want to point out a letter that I just saw Shkach Chapatis yesterday, so I decided to bring it in. This Nakuda that by the Rebbe, the Gashris and the Ruchnis is Ein Zach, is something we see everywhere in all of the Rebbe's Igris. Just start reading Igris everywhere you turn. The Rebbe talks about this idea that what the Torah says is the B'tzias Begashmias, not just an Inyan. So this letter is not directly related to Melech Basodeh, but Bashkach Chapatis, I saw it yesterday, and I thought, Mamish ties in, this Yid over here, his wife wasn't feeling well Begashmias. And the Rebbe said that your Aveda is to do Ashpa of Afatas Hamayanis, to learn Chassidus. And if you learn Chassidus, then you're going to feel better Begashmias, because Chassidus is Meisef Chayes Begashmias. And since Ishte Kegufei Damya, if you're going to have more Chayes, then the Rechemel, your wife will have before Shlema. So we see over here a double layer, how the Rebbe tells him, learning Chassidus will give you a Suffer Begashmias. And then that itself is creating Gashmias. And then Derech dem, ishteki gufay, which the Gemara says seemingly is an idea, but the Rebbe is saying no. Kepshute mamish, ishteki gufay. If you have more chayis begashmi, is the derech hamela, your wife will have a first lema. So this kav is a kav we see everywhere in the Rebbe's Torah, that the ruchnis and the gashmi is ein zach, and if the ruchnis says something, and there's no question that that's the way it's going to be begashmias. So in the sugi of Melech Basodeh, we see this through and through. Many times when the Rebbe speaks about Melech Basodeh and such a davar oifen chai, the Rebbe is highlighting this idea that the Metzias Beruchnius is really our Metzias Begashmius. The challenge, however, becomes that even if you establish that this is true and this is emes and alagut dazachin, we still don't feel it. Still don't feel it. So here we have another very interesting chiddush. I understand it's a hisafa from the Rebbe, and this is the two different places in Chelik Beis, where the Rebbe talks about the idea that as much as we say Melech Basodeh, and as much as we say that the king comes down to you, where you are, in your matzah, with all of your issues and all of your, still, you have to have Epes Alein Avedatam. So first the Rebbe says this in Chelik Beis about the importance of being extra careful, that because the king is so accessible, then you can get upgeschwacht, and you can think to yourself, I don't have to do any Aveda, the king is here anyways. So the Rebbe says as a mantzach, as a hiris miyuchedes, to sich mis'ala sein, to lift yourself up, to be a keli to l'kabel pnei Melech. Then the Rebbe says it later in Chelik Beis, and the Yisaf is even clearer, that even though these galus is the kol echad ve'echad, but still you have to be l'kabel pnei Melech. So the king is in the Sadeh, you're also in the Sadeh, but you have to walk over to the king. So my understanding of this is very clear, that after and parallel to the fact that the Rebbe tells us that Melech Basodeh is real, and it's a davar chai, and it's an eingestalten teva, and every yid feels it naturally. Still, in order to be able to access that gilui, you still have to do something with Tzad Atzmai. You still have to epsech aleintan, and you have to elevate yourself to go mekabel pnei hamelech, like we see the lashon in the mashal itself. So I want to give my own grabbe mashal for this. That really helps me mamchash is nekuda. Is that if you go to Berlin, I was on shlichus many times in Berlin, and there's a fascinating monument that they have there. Is that by the Berlin Wall, which is the place where, which I remember very vividly, Tafshin Nun, when the Rebbe spoke about all the nisim that were happening. The Berlin Wall was very unique because you were able to be on one side of the wall and you could look at the other side and you see people that are walking around freely. So while you are in a place of gullus, you're in a place of real under communist rule, if you take 2 steps forward, you're going to get shot and killed, but you could see your brother, your sister walking around freely. So they have a monument of somebody standing on top of a big stone and the person screaming to the other side, and it's trying to be mamchesh this idea that he sees something, but he can't actually say, you can't actually get to it. So to me, this is a mashal. The more you learn and you listen and you watch the Rebbe speak by Melech Basodeh, you see how the Rebbe Pashit feels it, sees it, as a davar chai, and the Rebbe is telling us, come on this mountain, come on this rock with me. I want you to see was ich seh. I want you to see. I want you to daher. Was reingestalt in Teva. Zman is galus. I want you to feel what's really, really happening. You have to come on the stone. You have to epis abisal azaza. But it's mamish adavar chai that you are able to access. If you're able to give yourself a little bit of a shackle, you could feel this thing that's very, very real in a muchashtika way. So now that we got to this point, that we understand how it's a davar chai and how the Alter Rebbe's payolus involved and how we can access it, I want to point out a few other interesting things. That this is the actual Sefer for Chelik Beis, where the Rebbe says that Sefadet sich yarnel or reisgehen von seiner Art lakabel pnei Melech. Jeder einer soll reisgehen von seinen Jahren von seiner Regilsen if lakabel pnei Melech. So if you complain, you saying Melech Basodeh, I don't see it, I don't feel it, I don't hear it. So the answer is, you have to epis do yourself in order to get that. Now I want to talk a little bit about interesting other diyukim that the Rebbe mentions that maybe some people didn't notice as you were going through the sugya. So first of all, this is very obvious why it's tzadav aloi ba'ir. It's the whole likud of the whole maimer. You're just a small ketav from Doshim Avav, but this is the whole idea of sada is dafka mentioned that orangutan and yani sada. Interestingly, the Shadav Alei Bamidbar, there's 3 different biyurim the Rebbe gives why the Alter Rebbe doesn't say Melech Bamidbar. Because the question is, if the whole idea of Melech Basodeh is that the Melech comes down to where you are, so if so, the Melech should have come all the way to the Midbar. So the first biyur the Rebbe gives is that the whole idea of Melech Basodeh is that the Eibishter comes to us in our Vedas HaBirurim, where we're misasik in Velt and we're doing our part to Maila the Velt Kedusha. And it's known that in Midbar, Eretz Leizarua, there's no shaykhis of Avedas Abidur. There's no Aveda there. It's not shaykh to, there's no nitzaitis that we have to be Mavaya. But Afka and the Sada, which is Avedas Adam, that's where the king meets us because that's where we're supposed to be Maila the nitzaitis. The second beer that Rebbe said, which is going back to Chelik Beis, this big Yesod that the Melech doesn't go to the Midbar because Madav Zechapes Aleintam. If the Melech will come to the Midbar, then he's coming all the way down to us. When the Melech is in the Sada, it automatically demands from those who are in the Midbar that you have to give yourself a little bit of a move and you have to go up a little bit to the Sada. And the third beer, very interesting, that Rebbe said in the mind, but that actually the truth is the Melech does go to the Midbar. And the reason why the Mashal says Melech Basodeh is just to show that it's not in the ear. But the Melech goes to the Midbar Eichet, which is very gishmak, because in most places the Rebbe is Shiloh Midbar. But in that particular place, the Rebbe says, no, the Melech goes to the Midbar. And the Mashal uses Sada just to negate ear, because usually it goes Sada versus ear. I saw something very interesting, which I'll go back to it, that I saw a letter from the Rebbe wrote to all Jewish prisoners, which that itself is an incredible letter, to all Jewish detainees everywhere, in Tafshin Lamed Zayin. And in that letter, the Rebbe brings Melech Basodeh, and the Rebbe says, needless to say, the field in this context includes also houses of detention and correctional facilities. So in this beautiful letter where the Rebbe is lifting up the Sebrachan and the Shamas, the Rebbe clearly states that the Melech is not only in the Sad, not only in the Mid, but the Melech goes until the jail itself, wherever a Yid may be. The other interesting ha'ara on the is why is Sadav Alei B'Shuk? Why doesn't it give the mashal Melech B'Shuk? Like we see the Zayar actually brings a mashal of B'Shuk the Bursky, but again too Yugim the Zarachim B'Chei Shalom. And the Rebbe brings the same idea we mentioned earlier about Midbar, that Sadar is Makar Chayev Sa'adam, Eretz Yimena Yetzir Lechem. And the whole idea of a Sada is Avedas Adam, Charisha, Zriya, Ktsira, and that Derech Avedas and the Avedas Adam is Magalas Koyach Zriya in the Eibishter. You know, the way he's Megala, the Eibishter in Velt, that's done Dafka in the Sada. That's why we bring Sada, because B'derech Klal Sada is a mashal klali for the Avedas Adam in Avedas Abirunim, in this Askus and Elam Haza. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says Sada, not Shuk. Now that we talk about some of those interesting details, I want to talk about a general Nakuda, something really fascinating that dawned upon me in preparing this Kavitz. And that is that the Rebbe brings a Yesod that's brought down in many different places when it talks about the Sugya Melech Basodeh. And based on this Yesod, in many different Sichas HaMamarim and even Igris, the Rebbe Eisfers, that's why things are done in a certain way. So in other words, based on this Yesod, we have fascinating outcomes. What is this Yesod? This Yesod is the fact that the Gilui, Ha'ava, Atzmis, from the Eibishter is Dafke when the Melech comes to the Sada. When the Melech is in the field, in the Armain, when the Melech is Behichale, the Ava that he gives to the Am is Ava Begiluyim. It's talking about all the Giluyim, all the fanfare, all the excitement. But when the Melech is Basodeh, there you have his Galas Ha'atzmus, there you mamish have the Esadik Liebschaft that the Melech has, that the Eibishter has for every Yid. Like it's brought on Chavav, and we see this in very, very extensive in the Sikha of Tashim Mem Zayin. So this is the Nakuda of Gilia Ava Atzmis comes Dafke through the Yerida to the Sada. Ava L'Mala Megiluyim. Interestingly, based on this, we can understand 11 different parts of the mashal. And those are, number one, the Rebbe talks about why does Alter Rebbe even bring a mashal? We don't always find mashalim for everything in the Chassidus. The Rebbe answers because the whole idea of bringing a mashal is to be mamchish, that dafke here, in the lowest place, that you actually need a mashal for such a place, dafke there is magal the Ava Atzmis. This is also the explanation why the mashal is from Dvarim Gashmiyim. The Rebbe speaks about Tashim Mem Vav. The Alter Rebbe could have brought a mashal maybe about more loftier things. Why is the mashal about Mamish Dvarim Gashmiyim, Anshe Asada, Big Day Asada, talking about words of Sada? Again, because this Badait, the Ava Atzmis that comes dafka durch the Yeridah. This also explains why he brings a mashal b'melech without even saying what kind of melech, which means that this mashal could even be melech of Umasailam, which is the biggest Yeridah possible. That again is for the same reason, because dafka durch the Yeridah is magala the Ava Atzmis. Interestingly, a different year the Rebbe said that really it's not shaykh by melech Umasailam, and the only reason why the mashal seems to indicate that it could be relevant to Umasailam is mitzad b'chira, but be'etzem this mashal is only shaykh by a yid from Bnei Yisrael. The number 4, the Rebbe brings out an interesting question. Why is the Alter Rebbe marich in such a riches, 5 lines in the mashal? Even when the Armisholim brought in Chassidus, wouldn't usually find such a riches, especially not in the Alter Rebbe's Mamarim. And the Rebbe explains because this is mamchish, this is madgish, the Geidel HaYerida, that it has to be mefarid, barichis, and bepratius, to highlight and to stress how much of Yerida this is for the Melech. Because Dafka there is this Gala Ava Atzmis. This is why he brings a mashal Basodeh v'loi ba'ir, obviously. The whole Nakuda of the Maim is Dafka Basodeh. This is why we say Tachan L'chei Shalom. L'chei, we shouldn't say Tachan L'chei Shalom. Imagine the king comes to spend a few weeks in your house, you wouldn't say Tachnun. So why do we say Tachnun? And the answer is because by saying Tachnun, we're madgish the Geidel HaYerida of the Melech. That the Melech comes down to where I am in my world of Tachnun, in the zone where I have to be mischaret and chatoyim. There the Melech comes, because that is highlighting this Nakuda, that dafka durch the Yerida you have the Alish Ava Shalom Al Megiluyim. Number 7, this explains why the Melech comes to the Sada. L'chayda, it's a big Yerida. Why is the Melech even coming to the Sada? The question was asked in a few different places. And the answer is because dafka there is Mizgal the Ava Atzmis. This also explains, number 8, why Yetzim Anshe Eir Sada. L'chayda, it's the biggest Yerida. Anshe Eir should stay in the city. Why is the neshama coming down to the guf? And again, the same answer, because of the Ava Atzmis. This also explains that Rebbe asked Tashim Amches, why don't we see that the mashal tells us more about Ichis, the reaction of the Yidden. It talks about what the Melech is doing, but it doesn't talk about what it's pale, the uftu. Why don't we hear a little bit about the reaction and the response? The mashal shall tell us about the simchat summa and the bittul betachlis that the Bnei Yisrael are feeling from the king in the field. And the Rebbe explains that the Dafka doesn't say all that because that would be Giluyim. The whole Nakuda Melech Basodeh is Gilia Ava Atzmis, even if the Yidden didn't respond, even if they didn't feel, even if they don't express it, it's an Ava Atzmis Shalamayla Megiluyim. And this also explains Number 10, why don't we see anywhere written Mishanichnas Elul Ma'aber B'Simcha? Chiddush should be a extra simcha Chiddush Elul because Melech Basodeh, and we see not a halacha, not a minhag, nowhere. And the answer is because that's the whole idea. It's higher than a minhag. If there was a minhag, it would be Giluyim. But the reason why there's no minhag is because the whole idea is that the Melech Basodeh is Magala Ava Atzmis Lamayla Megiluyim. Finally, number 11, this also explains why the Melech is Mara Panim Seichikis, because it's talking about Ava Atzmis. So the purpose of this here is just to highlight that this one Yesod that the Rebbe brings, this Yesod, that dafke when the Melech is Basodeh, when you don't feel the Reimimis, and you don't have the Sadim Rabbim and Nechbadim Mishtachavim. Dafke there, there's no tzir, there's no agbala. Dafke there, you have the Atzmius of the Melech and the Kesher, which the Gili Atzmusei Shalamaylam comes here. And based on that, you say we understand all these 11 different aspects of Melech Basodeh that are an extension of this foundational idea. A few other interesting things in the sugya. There's a question that Rebbe asked by a rally, just said the psukim, and one of the psukim is Hine Hashem Nitzav Olav. So the Rebbe asked the children, L'cheira, Tanya tells us that every day the Eibishter is Nitzav Olav, U'malei Chvedes Kolas Kvedei, Im Oivdei Karoi. So what's the Isaf of Chedesh Elul? Melech Nimtza Basodeh, the Melech Basodeh, every day the Eibishter is with me, watching me. Mabit Olav Aveichin Kleyes V'leiv. What's a greater closeness than that? So the Rebbe gave two different answers, two different times. One time the Rebbe explained something so beautiful, and that is that if you look in Tanya in the context of Perek Mamalef, it's all about the Oivdei Karoi. The Eibishter is checking to see if you're serving him correctly. But the whole Chiddush of Chedesh Elul is that the Melech is with you when you're Minyan Sada, when you're sleeping, when you're eating, when you're resting. Lav Dafka when you're Eisek in Avedas Tefillah or Limud Teira. That's the Chiddush of Melech Basodeh. That the Eibishter is with you even more Begolui when you're Misasek and other things. It's interesting, Derech Agav, that many times in rallies the Rebbe would talk to the kids about how the Melech is with you even when you're Misasek in Yanei Elam. The Rebbe would say, Lamashal, when you're eating or drinking, Shalei b'sha'asa bracha, because that would be the difference. During the bracha, it's Hine Hashem Nitzav Alehim Evdei Karoi. But before you make the bracha and after you make the bracha, that's the Tenu of Melech Basodeh. Another beer that Rebbe said a different time is what is the outcome by Hine Hashem Nitzav Alav. The whole purpose of that is bitterness. Is that therefore you should stand before the Eibishter be'emo be'yira ke'em lefnei HaMelech. So this is bitterness of Hine Hashem Nitzav Alav. Is mainly the feeling of Ema and Yira, which is what Perek Mamalef is all about. Chedesh Elul, Melech Basodeh is not here to do an inyan of Yira. It's here to do an inyan of Ava. Ani L'Deidi, that when you misbein, how the Melech is Yeri to Makim Kvedei, all the way down to me in the field, it's Melech Ava. And that's the difference between Hine Hashem Nitzav Alav and the idea of Melech Basodeh. Finally, I want to conclude with another fascinating way that we see the diyukim that Rebbe has in this Maimer. The lashon of panim seichikis is brought in quite a few different places. What is the understanding of panim seichikis? What does it mean, panim seichikis? But interestingly, I found, I'm sure there's others more, 4 different explanations that Rebbe gives for panim seichikis. And interestingly, we find that each one of these understandings of panim seichikis lead to a different outcome. So depending on how you understand and perceive what panim seichikis means, that's going to have a different effect on the makabel. On the Yid is Makabel Pnei HaMelech. So the first beer is Panim Seichikis. The Rebbe focuses in this particular Maimer on Gilia Pnimius. That even though the Eibishter is Rein Arech, and even though the whole beer of Machus Kalilamim is that there's a huge gap between the Melech and the Am, but Zazam and Medem, there are special times when the Melech goes out to the Sada and he's Magalas Pnimius. So usually when you see the king in the palace, you're not really seeing the king. You're seeing the king with all of his external trappings and all his external layers. But when the Melech comes to the Sada, then the Pnimius of the Melech comes Begili, which is the Gilia Lamayla Mishtalshalos even in the field. Gilia Pnimius. Based on this, the Rebbe fears in that Maimer, that it's poiled by a Yid, that a Yid should also experience himself Megalas and Egen Pnimius. Be'er Pnei Melachayim, durch them, that the Melech is Megala, his Pnimius to me, then the Neshama of the Yid is able to come out and Megala his own Pnimius. So that's the first understanding of Panim Seichik, because Pnimius, that's Megala the Pnimius from the Makabel. The second beard is Ava, Pasha Kipshute. Panim Seichikis, the Melech Mara Ava Seila'am. The king Pasha shows Libshaft. And this is the Maimer, the whole Arichas Maimer, where the Rebbe speaks about Tkiyah Shefer and Chedesh Elul. The Rebbe brings out that it's very important in Chedesh Elul to have the Aveda of Ava. Because when you're going to get to the Tkiyah Shefer of Rosh Hashanah, that's going to be already Yireh Ilah. So as a Hachana for the Tkiyah Shefer of Rosh Hashanah, we have to have the Aveda of Ava, Na'ifan of Ava Rabbah in Chedesh Elul. How do we get that Ava Rabbah to the Melech? That comes from Panim Seichikis. So the second beard is, Panim Seichikis is Ava, and that's Meilid Ava by the Makabel. The third beard is Tainug. This is the Chavav, where the Rebbe says Panim Seichikis is the Tainug of Melech Atzmai, which is the Maila from the Tainug that comes from the Seides Tshuva. The Rebbe goes more and says V'yashleimah that Panim Seichikis in the Nimshal is the Tainug B'Sheb Yisrael Atzmam. So we're talking about a Tainug Atzmi, a Tainug that the Eibishter has in the Metzias of the Yid himself, and that's a Taich Panim Seichikis. And what does this do? What does this cause? What does this lead? This is Mara Lahem Panim Seichikis, and as Mizgala, this is Poyla by the person himself. He's also Ma'ir in himself, the Tainug in the Leikus. Ad Kedikach, but the Tainug in the Leikus becomes part of Etzem of his own Tainug. And this gives him the Koyach, the Mizgaber of all the Menuim Ma'akvim. So number 3 is Tainug, the Eibishter's Tainug Genuns, is Poyl, that it's Megala, our Tainug in the Eibishter. And the third is Simcha. Panim Seichikis Kepshutei Mamish. This is the Tashim Memches, the Rebbe kocht a lot in the Simcha and Chedesh Elul, that's in that beautiful Fabrengen. Panim Seichikis Kepshutei, Pashit Ashmeichel, Mare Simcha Gdele Lekula. And obviously the Uftu from them is Durchtam at the Melech is Besimcha, it's Meir Simcha by every Yid as well. So to summarize, a little sikkum of what we spoke about today. First Nakuda is how by the Rebbe Melech Basodeh is a davar chai. It's a zach was mamish selept. At kedikach, the Rebbe's lashon is that it's arangishtalt in teva. It's put into the teva of the Welt itself. As we see, the Rebbe expects that everyone should feel that even without any additional help. The additional help is just even more. We brought the discussion about. I just realized something I forgot, but I'll add it at the end. We brought the discussion about the idea that the Rebbe's Medayik and Zman is Galus, that this is something which is mamash, something which is embedded in the time. Spoke about the Makar. The Rebbe points out that the Makar is the Alter Rebbe, which is the Gresta Zach, because he's a Paisik, so he creates this reality. And he's a Nasi, so he makes it a reality that's accessible to everybody, including children. The Chayre, you can't see it. The Rebbe says even if you can't see it, it's still the Metzias Amitis. And the fact that you can't see it itself shows you how great it is, but you still are zeicher to feel it. We spoke about the idea that even if you don't feel it, that's because Samatzach and Aveda, the Rebbe's Vart, the Rebbe's Chiddush actually, that yeah, even though it's Yecholim, you still have to do something on your own to feel it. You have to actually, to leave your place to Makabel Pnei HaMelech. That we spoke about Sadeh B'lei B'midbar, Sadeh B'lei B'shuk. And then we spoke about the idea that because of this Gili Ava Atzmis that comes back with Durch the Yerida, that leads us to 11 different Nekudas in the Mashal that are a direct outcome of that Yisoid. The reason why Melech Basodeh is a Hisafa on Hini Hashem. Finally, the 4 different ways to understand Panim Seichikis and how that leads to 4 different outcomes. So this was just a Skira Klalis. I encourage you to get the Kavit. You go to melechbasodeh.com and you can download the PDF. And I hope I was meisif a little bit, no major chidushim here, but it definitely for me was a geschmack to be able to share a little bit about the sugya that I had the privilege of Araintan and Abyssal. If anyone has, I'd love to hear comments, questions, hisafis, something maybe that you remember from a sikha that you want to add, the Simcha Rabbah.
Not really related. How did you get such a koch in it? What started you off?
What happened was, it was a shtacha pratis. This was a long time ago, before there was Eitzar HaChachmeh, before a lot of Meftekos were around. I was Elul, and I was just going through some Fabrengens, and I realized that's so interesting. There's interesting Isafri here. The Rebbe didn't mention it last time he bought the mashal. And I can't think of many other instances where the Rebbe takes a short thing, and a Kudech Chassidus, not so much even a Kudech Chassidus, a mashal, and mamish is mahafich old ways. What comes to mind is maybe the story of the Alter Rebbe, the story of the Rebbe Nashab, was hat gewähnt, right? Why don't I see the Gili of the Eibishter like Avraham Avinu saw? That would be very interesting if someone wants to take that sugya, that Rebbe took that story and brought out many harayos and chinuch from it. And the other one, of course, is the mashal of the Magid, sorry, let's say with Ditchav, the mashal with the Beged, Shabbos Chazem, and the Beis Hamikdash. Rebbe spoke about it many times and took many different angles, but I don't think either of those come close to Melech Basodeh, the fact that we have so many Sichas HaMamarim. So it was just very interesting. So I started just for myself writing notes, what each Maimer, each Sicha was Meisif on it. And then over the years, you get more and more, and then I kind of put it aside for a long time. And then 2 years ago, I decided that now that there's so much more Teres Menachem and there's so much more printed, so I was able to add a few more Hisafis. Shkacha Prat is the first time I made this kavitz without even noticing. I sent it to the printer and I got it back and it was exactly 32 pages, which is Mamash Shkacha Pratis. If you know what I'm referring to, the Rebbe says that this is on Daf Lamed Beis of look at the Torah. This is Mamash the Leiv, the hearts. So, and 2 years ago when I added 10 more pages, it wasn't 32 pages anymore. But that's a little bit of the background how I got into it. But it's lahafli. It's pashut. To me, more than anything, is the oisius to the kinder. Just the rallies where the Rebbe speaks about Melech Basodeh. It's such a. It teaches us how to speak to our children about inyanim like this.
Okay, how do you teach out to simple people? Maybe I missed some in the beginning, but how do you teach out to simple people to whatever, to somehow experience this Melech Basodeh and Elul?
To me, the way I teach it out is I say that often you feel that when you come to services on high holidays, you need to prepare yourself accordingly, and you come dressed appropriately, and you come prepared, and you come in the mode and in the zone. So I want to share with you that during these 30 days, we actually have the opportunity to access that same energy, maybe even more differently, but to feel a tremendous closeness to the Eibishter, without all of those external layers and without all of those required preparations. You could literally talk to Hashem, connect with the Eibishter in the middle of a workday, in the middle of your classes, walking down the street, wherever you are, in any moment. Even if you're not doing a mitzvah, even if you're just eating or exercising, you will feel a greater sense of closeness if, here's the big if you're willing to do a little bit to leave the place where you are right now. If you're willing to do a little bit of a skafia, a little bit of a kol tchia, a little bit of something small, whether it's a sermeidah or a seitov, to leave the place you're in right now, then you will be able to access this unbelievable gilui that maybe you won't even be able to get on a Shana Yom Kippur. And not only that, if you do this, then when it comes to Shana Yom Kippur, you'll feel it even so much more. You'll be so much more prepared, so much more in a kli, in the mode to feel it. Those are the ICS that I would use, which is really just adapting everything that we just learned.
Yeah.
All right, the Ikr should be Zeicha, that we should see the Melech Basodeh, Chayel Tavshin Yud. The Rebbe actually used that Lashon. The Rebbe said, as will be Zeicha, as the Rebbe kommt zum Feld, Makabo, Beseva Panam Yafis, Mara Panam Zeicha, Metech Simcha, und es Mashpia zu Alamen. We should be Zeicha to see that Begalil and Enu Agashmim, and we should have a Chsivich Samateva, Shamateva Masukah.